Something that's come up a lot in past episodes of this podcast is the notion around productivity. And so it's really no surprise that this question around work comes up a lot in terms of people wondering what kind of accommodations will be most helpful to ask for when dealing with their mental illness or their mental health in the workplace. And likewise, also employers wanting to know what kind of accommodations they can offer employees who may be facing mental health challenges. And so in today's episode of our podcast, we are going to be diving deeper into potentially helpful accommodations that you can either ask for or offer to your employees in the workplace.
So I think that mental health in the workspace is becoming a more, I don't want to say like popular topic, but employers are looking for more ways that they can accommodate mental health in the workplace. But I think another aspect of the whole puzzle is kind of reminding people that they might need to advocate for themselves for different workplace accommodations. So there's that aspect. There's the kind of worker-led aspect. And then from an organizational point of view or a leadership point of view, I think there's also the idea of understanding that it's not just about having, this list of workplace accommodations that your organization offers. There needs to be a cultural shift in terms of putting value on that. And I think it could come from workers in terms of advocating for themselves, but it really does, I think, for an effective change need to come from leadership and management as well, supporting those initiatives.
Agreed. It needs to be a culture and environment that is more accepting and accommodating for people who are living with mental health challenges or just anyone really, to make it more of a comfortable workspace. I think another reality is that not all workplaces, and probably the majority of workplaces, are not going to be terribly well versed or educated on mental health and potential accommodations that people might need for their mental health. And so that's just kind of a reality in what you mentioned about needing to self-advocate a lot, and that being a really big piece of this puzzle too.
Yeah, like asking for what you need.
Yeah. And I think that that's actually where people get the most hung up, is not knowing what they need. I think that I was in that position in the workplace where I knew that it wasn't working the way I was expected to engage in my work and in the workplace and whatnot. It wasn't working, but I didn't know what to ask for to change. I didn't know what was possible. I didn't know what was going to be the best fit for me. I didn't know. And so hopefully going over some potential accommodations in this podcast will help people who maybe know they need to ask for accommodations, but don't quite know what to ask for, to have some, better ideas for potential ways that they can be better taken care of in their workplace and ultimately
be more successful,
productive, all those things. So we're going to dive into all that, but I just want to take a minute to remind you all about our online peer support community. It's a really wonderful space to talk with other people who may be going through similar experiences to you or similar challenges, and it's just a really great form of support. So we offer text channel supports as well as weekly peer support groups that are facilitated and live. And so if that is something that interests you, make sure to check it out at onlinepeersupport.com. We also have a link to that in the description below. Also, another little shout out is that we recently got new merch, which you can see one of here, an example of here. Really excited about this line of mental health themed apparel. So if you're interested in picking up a new shirt, sweater, mug, bag, what have you, make sure to check out our merch shop, which is also linked below.
Okay, so coming back to accommodations, in terms of obviously there's kind of tons of different accommodations. Where would you kind of start in terms of, okay, this is the first priority that people should be thinking about?
I think more flexible hours is probably a good place to start, and one that would really, I think, benefit a lot of people. I think the reality is that we're just not really built to work 9 to 5 strict, regimented hours like that. It's not the most effective, format for really hardly anyone. And especially if you're dealing with a mental illness where you have fluctuating capacity and maybe your most productive hours don't land within that 9 to 5 period, or maybe you're struggling a lot more during that 9 to 5 period, it can be really, really difficult to engage with your work in an effective and productive way when your capacity just doesn't land within those hours. And so having more flexibility as an employer or asking for more flexibility as an employee can be a good place to start. This can also look like, I know some people who take a day off in the middle of the week. They take Wednesday off. They work Monday, Tuesday, have a little break on Wednesday, and work Thursday, Friday again. So just figuring out how you can kind of tailor your work schedule more to your needs and, the way you can engage most effectively with your work. I think maybe there's this idea when you scale back work hours that you're scaling back, work or productivity and whatnot. But I think that really what that helps to do is focus your attention and your productive work hours more. And actually what's happened for me anyway, when I scale back my work hours and tailor it more to my periods of increased capacity, is that I end up being more productive than if I just sat there trying to work 8-9 hour days every day.
Okay. And then following up on like adjusted work hours, something that we've seen happen a lot over the pandemic is the shift to work from home.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be something that you would think would be kind of another thing, or that's just kind of a general accommodation?
I think that can be really helpful for people who are dealing with mental health struggles. I think that, office environments can often be a really overstimulating environment. And when you're struggling with your mental health, that can be really difficult to manage and to engage with. And so, yeah, it has been helpful for me in the past to have a break from that and to be able to just focus on work from home. Now, that this isn't a great option for everyone. I also get very sidetracked and end up being less productive sometimes when I'm working from home. And that's just an individual preference thing. But it could be an option in terms of if you're looking for a little break from the stimulation of the workplace. It could be an option to ask for some work from home hours.
And obviously this isn't going to work for everybody in terms of what type of work they're doing. So.
Right. Another kind of topic that goes hand in hand with this idea of more flexible scheduling is just the idea of taking mental health days. I think that this is something that people still kind of shy away from. It's getting more popular and more accepting, I guess, around the idea of taking a mental health day. But I think, for me anyway, when I was working in a regular workplace setting, I very rarely, actually, I don't think I ever said, I need a mental health day when I called in sick or, an absence or whatever. I always was making up some sort of physical illness, like, I'm just not feeling great today. My stomach's upset or whatever, some sort of physical ailment I felt the need to cover it up as. But I think that if we want to create an environment that is accepting and positive in terms of taking care of people's mental health, we need to acknowledge that people need mental health days, just like they need physical health sick days. You're not always going to be feeling up to making your brain focus on work for a day. And it's okay to take breaks if your brain just needs a little bit of a break. And so this goes both ways in terms of feeling comfortable telling your employer, I just need a mental health day. And also for employers to offer mental health days to their employees. I think that's really important in terms of creating a positive workplace culture.
Okay, so flexibility is probably the biggest adjustment that an organization can make in terms of accommodations. The next thing I think we're going to talk about is supervision. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So supervision, is kind of the perhaps most important relationship, I guess, in terms of productivity and reporting to someone in the workplace and whatnot. And if you can create a relationship and a dynamic in this dynamic of supervisor employee, it can be really beneficial in terms of creating a more accepting and healthy space. And so some ways that this can be done is perhaps it can be, increasing or modifying the amount of individualized supervision hours you have to kind of just check in. Because, something that happened a lot for me in the workplace was some little thing would come up, which I couldn't deal with. and it would snowball and snowball. And I'd try to just kind of keep pushing it down, trying to pretend like I was handling everything and making everything work. And then it would just snowball into this big, big issue. And perhaps if I had more regular check-ins to kind of talk about these issues that can come up and that can feel overwhelming, I think it would have curtailed this snowball effect a lot and been really beneficial in terms of just being able to be more open about what was going on and creating kind of open dialogue about that and feeling safe to do so as well. And so, the ultimate idea behind this is to eliminate these issues from snowballing into giant issues that then need to be dealt with at different levels within the organization or company. Some other ways could be just changing the way supervision is communicated or given. And so perhaps, passing instruction in the hallway is not the best format. Perhaps it needs to be written instruction or written communication, and that can be better and a better accommodation for the employee. Or perhaps it can be recorded so that they can listen back to it. Or, just figuring out what the best way to communicate literally with the employee is, or with your supervisor.
Do you think that it kind of can go the opposite direction sometimes in terms of accommodation? So I think especially like bureaucratic organizations where there's just like kind of endless meetings that could really just get in the way and slow somebody down who is already kind of having a difficult time maybe keeping up, and then taking away the energy that they would have for like productive work because it's tied up in like meeting type stuff. Maybe this is just my own personal gripe with meetings. But I do kind of feel like there's probably people who like they just could get the work done if people got out of the way kind of thing. Do you think that's kind of an accommodation that you could ask for? Or
perhaps I think the idea here that's important is to have open communication with your supervisor about your needs and what will help you be most effective in your position. And so, perhaps if you feel that too much energy is going to meetings that could have been an email, we all have experienced those, then asking for that and just asking for communication in different ways. Perhaps it could have literally been an email, and that's how you go forward communicating about that kind of thing. And so, just having that open communication about what your needs are and hopefully creating that dynamic that feels safer to talk about problems or to talk about, adjustments that you may need.
I think another accommodation that people should feel free to ask for and or about is the ability to modify what their job duties are. And I guess this will work to varying degrees in different organizations and depending on what you're doing. But it could be possible for you to just, be continuing to work in an organization, but not doing exactly the sort of thing that you were doing before. I think there's a lot of organizations that do kind of have a lot of like lateral movement in terms of employment and work opportunities and duties and tasks. So I think that's another thing that maybe doesn't get brought up enough in terms of what people can ask for. They just feel like, I can't do this, so I can't do this job anymore. But, that organization could still want you and you could still offer value to that organization, but maybe just doing different work.
Right. And perhaps it's just like one facet of your job that is increasing your stress and making you feel overwhelmed and like you can't do the job. And so kind of pinpointing where those kinds of issues are and asking maybe for a little shift or modification to your job duties. Another accommodation that's perhaps more often thought of for, physical impairments, but I think can actually be helpful for mental health challenges as well. It's been helpful for me is using technology to record either meetings with your supervisor or interactions with your supervisor or colleagues or training programs or meetings or whatever it may be. Because I know that for me, as a result of my mental illness, I have difficulties with memory sometimes. And so just hearing information can be hard to retain. And so having some sort of recording device, whether it's just a phone, whether it's some sort of transcription device, can be really, really helpful in terms of revisiting information that's been communicated to you and just, having something to reference. Another potential way that technology can be used is the use of headphones. Again, offices can be an overstimulating environment, and sometimes just kind of tuning out the background noise can be helpful too. So these are just a handful of different accommodations that you can perhaps think about asking your employer for, or if you are an employer, you can offer to your employees. But I think what's really, really important here is just creating an environment and a office culture that is accepting and wanting to work with employees to accommodate them and to support their mental health and their overall health and well-being. I think that is perhaps an overlooked component of offering accommodations.
I think that there is this, and has been this focus on productivity. We've talked about it in previous videos. And this idea that somebody with mental health challenges or mental illness is less productive. And I hope and I think that there's a shift towards an understanding that that person can be productive. It's kind of a matter of figuring out between the employer and the employee the best way to make that happen.
And understanding that the way the workplace is structured is for a neurotypical person. And, that's okay that it's kind of built for someone with a brain that functions a certain way, the normal way, if you will.
But even that, I think it's not totally built for those people either. It's built along this idea of everybody getting together at a specific time, And so I think with COVID, I think there has been more of a recognition of like, oh, well, people could be more productive from home. So like offering accommodations to people, I guess, neurotypical, and they can still be productive. I think that kind of idea should and can be applied to other situations in an organization. For example, dealing with people who have mental health challenges.
But that's kind of an example of when neurotypical people needed an accommodation, they were granted it. The need to all of a sudden work from home as a result of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Whereas, people who may be more neurodivergent or struggling with some sort of health challenge were not granted that same accommodation for their mental health challenges. And that has been the problem, that we haven't been willing to accommodate differences. The second that everyone needed an accommodation, it was granted. But we haven't historically, and for the majority, been willing to offer accommodations to minority groups. And that's something that I think really needs to change. And that is a part of building an inclusive and accommodating and positive, healthy workplace, is being willing to accommodate people with differences.
So if you could imagine that you're sitting down with the head of an organization right now, company, what would you say to them in terms of they're asking you, how do we create this culture, this more inclusive culture? Where do I start? How do I do it? It's something that I want, but it's not something that I understand how to implement. What would you say to this person?
I would caution against something that happens a lot, that I see happening a lot, where companies and organizations get really stuck in kind of surface level awareness and mental health fluff, if you will, where they bring in puppies to have, puppy therapy to take care of employees' mental health, or they have yoga sessions or, stuff like that, okay, perhaps that's building community and office culture or whatnot, but it's really not getting at supporting employees' mental health. If anything, it's making them feel even further isolated in difficulties they may be experiencing, because they look around and they're like, oh, these puppies and this yoga should be making me more productive or helping me fit better into this workplace when that really is not getting at the issue and is not supporting them in the ways that they need. And so perhaps cautioning against falling into very common ideas of supporting employee mental health like that, and moving more into creating an environment with your employees where they feel comfortable coming forward with difficult things and feeling like they're not going to be reprimanded for sharing that they're struggling in the workplace. I think that's like a really good place to start, is making it known that if an employee or anyone in the organization is struggling in some way with their work or engaging with work, there's not going to be, reprimands for that. We're going to work with them to figure out how to accommodate them and how to support them through that, whether that's any number of the accommodations we've talked about, shifting their role within the organization, whatever, but making it known that you support your employees. Because, a reality that I think often goes missed or overlooked in corporate culture is that human beings are working for you, and human beings are messy. Life is messy. Stuff happens. There's never going to be someone who can just 100% be productive, fit the job bill all the time. And so understanding that, I guess, and coming from a place of leading people in a way that understands that they're going to go through a multitude of experiences, and it can be really beneficial and helpful if their workplace is supporting them through that and working with them through that. And perhaps another place is just general mental health education. So bringing people in to talk with employees about mental health, what it actually means to take care of your mental health, maybe talking about some mental illnesses so that there's more education and awareness within the organization about what dealing with a mental illness can mean for employees, for colleagues, for themselves. Just building awareness in that regard can be helpful as well.
Okay, and then one final kind of question or thought here is, what about what could you tell this person about the value of creating this kind of culture in their organization? How would you tell them, like, no, it's worth it. It's worth it for you to implement these changes and to have this culture?
I mean, I think I can share my own experience of being an employee in organizations and feeling like I didn't quite fit what was expected. And so I oftentimes just left the position or felt like I was forced out of it. And I have a lot of skills and,
Professional experience.
yeah, I could contribute a lot if there had been accommodations and greater acceptance of my differences. And, I'm sure that there are a lot of other people with similar experiences where they had some kind of difference that didn't feel totally accepted, and so they left. And that's a loss of a huge amount of value that person could have provided. Or, if someone is working under conditions that are kind of stifling and feeling overwhelming and whatnot, that is absolutely impacting their productivity and the value that they contribute to the organization. And so, just from a pure productivity value derived perspective, it makes sense to take care of your employees and to make sure we're accommodating them in a way that increases their productivity, but ultimately also improves their overall well-being, because that in itself is going to improve productivity as well.
I think it's interesting what you said about, loss of employees, and you don't even know why.
Right.
Like, they have no idea, and they're probably not chalking it up to mental health. They just have no idea. So yeah, understanding that if you do create that environment where somebody feels safe coming forward and being like, I need adjustments, and that this person, they've proven themselves in the organization, they're a valuable member of the organization and they're productive and what their contributions are and whatnot. Like, it makes sense to be able to have a system where you continue to capture that skill and that talent and have that person continue contributing.
Absolutely. And I think ultimately it makes your organization stronger to have different people with different kinds of strengths and different kinds of ways of thinking and ways of operating and stuff. I think that that's kind of, a mainstay behind the neurodiversity movement. Neurodiversity is beautiful. It's really enriching to have different ways of thinking. And, that obviously includes people with differences in their brain health, mental illnesses, and all that. Yeah. And just to kind of wrap things up on a last note, I think that it's really, really, really important to focus your attention and energy on listening and figuring out what the individual you are trying to accommodate needs. Because ultimately, not all the accommodations that we've talked about are going to be the right fit for everyone, and everyone's going to need something a little bit different. And so really working with the individual employee to figure out what their individual needs are in the workplace and what accommodations are going to be most beneficial for them.
Okay, so we've heard your thoughts on like what you would tell a leader or CEO or whatever. Do you have any kind of final thoughts here in terms of what you would tell somebody who is seeking accommodation or is, maybe they don't even know that they should be seeking accommodation, but they need something?
This kind of goes into the idea of disclosure in the workplace. And I know that that's something that a lot of people really struggle with, myself included in the past, and just, grappling with, well, if I ask for accommodations, am I disclosing, and, everything that goes along with the controversy around disclosing your mental illness to your employer. But I think ultimately just encouraging people to do everything they can to be as well as possible. And that includes asking for accommodations if you need it in the workplace in order to feel as well as possible, be as productive, which helps to feeling fulfilled and I guess perhaps in our capitalistic society. But just figuring out ways to make your life easier, I guess, and perhaps not looking at accommodations as a way of making things easier, but as a way of tailoring your tasks and, what people are expecting of you in a way that is going to set you up for success. It's not asking for a leg up. It's not asking for special accommodations that are kind of like a handout. It's just changing the way you're engaging with the work that you need to get done to set yourself up for success or to be as successful as possible. And it's absolutely okay to need different things than other people who are in similar positions. It doesn't mean you are lesser than, it doesn't mean you're weaker or anything. It means that you're different. And that's okay. I think that's a good thing to have differences like that. And so kind of embracing that a little bit.
Okay. That's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for listening to this episode. We'd love to hear from you though as well. If you have any experience asking for accommodations that have been effective for you in the workplace that we didn't mention in this video, we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Just a reminder also that you can listen to this podcast anywhere you get podcasts, but we'd love for you to come over to our YouTube channel where you can engage with us in the comments, and you can also subscribe so as not to miss any future content. Thank you so much again for listening, and we will see you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.